states is that a problem, or I would say a misappropriation that a lot of people make in terms of understanding Islam is when they put on their secular glasses or their liberal glasses or the democratic glasses and they try and look at Islam or measure Islam in accordance with that. Let me tell you something. If you do that, Islam will not measure up.
So you're saying you have to change your perspective?
You have to change your perspective, because the thing is this. The ruler of the West, and this is a post-colonial narrative, yeah? After the colonial, you have to understand that the Age of Discovery and the British Empire, these were not easy empires. They really had an encroachment of the earth. And the last colonial colony of Britain was like in the 50s. They're not just going to give all of that up easily, right? The Western world has a strong ideological encroachment on the rest of the world. It's because of its hegemonic power position, yeah? It wants us to believe what it believes. It just does, okay? It makes sense for its foreign policy, it makes sense for its domestic policy, it makes sense for its economic policies. What it believes now is not necessarily a religious framework. It's no longer the time of Christianity anymore. Christianity does not inform Western domestic or foreign policy anymore. It doesn't, yeah? Now it's secularism, now it's liberalism, now it's democracy. So the point is this. To what extent can we say that these ideologies are objective truths? And do the propounders of those ideologies or the philosophers that originally initiated them intend for them to be seen as objective truths? These ideologies were never intended to be seen as objective truths. So now, if you measure... No, what I'm saying is that, for example, the idea of liberalism, which was refined by like John Stuart Mill, you could say liberalism started with Thomas Hobbes. You could argue that with the Leviathan, and it continued up into J.S. Mill. And it was refined by him. The idea that you can do whatever you want so long as you don't harm anyone else, which is okay to some extent, but it's not what we go with. Because if you accept that premise, you accept incest, for example. You accept it.
But even incest, you can't, it's bad, right?
Yeah.
So you can't actually stop people from doing it. That's how if they want to do
Yeah,
that.
but we could say it's morally wrong, right?
Of course it's wrong.
Okay, but
I
liberalism,
think people do what they
on a
want.
liberal ideological framework, it wouldn't be wrong. It would just be an expression of someone's desires.
It would be wrong because the whole point of liberalism is individualism.
Yeah, exactly.
So subjectivity.
Right.
Recognizing subjectivity and kind of going
Right,
away.
I get that point. But then I would ask, how can we prove that that is the truth?
We can't.
Well, we can't.
There is
Okay,
no
good.
Like,
Yeah,
like
proof.
the absolute
Oh,
truth.
good, excellent. So if we can't prove that that's something which is absolutely or objectively true, then measuring Islam according to it is like measuring something with a stretchy ruler.
Fair enough.
Okay, if you use a stretchy ruler to measure something, then you're never going to get a precise measurement. 100 years ago, today, women were not allowed to vote in this country, and there was a strong case. I mean, if you think about it, there was a strong case for it. If you look at the parliamentary records, how people were actually talking against women's rights, it was normal for women not to vote, and it was radical for women to be enfranchised, to speak. Yeah, if that is the case, look, 100 years, which is like one generation, has completely shaped the way we think about women's rights in society. 100 years, 100 years, right? In 1967, in this country, it was illegal to be homosexual. There was a death penalty in this country. That's some 50 years ago, yeah? We're talking about 50 years ago, homosexuality, and now homophobia. So everything is just turned up. So look at the stretchy ruler that we've got. Look at the stretchy ruler. Now you put this stretchy ruler and you're trying to establish if Islam is the truth with it, or if Islam is not compatible with my morals, my aesthetic value judgments, which are based on today's present day popular morality, then it's not true. I would say to you then, how are you sure that in 2057 or 2100, yeah, that we're not going to have a new set of morals that we're going to now have to change Islam to and stuff like that?
It will change.
Yeah.
Morals do change over time.
Right, so what I'm saying is that, yeah, of course.
Was Islam spread by the sword? And if it was, can you give like explanation in which, and like, if it is, then surely that contradicts la ikraha fi din.
Okay.
Lakum dinukum waliya din. Do you know what I mean?
All right, so I'll answer that, but just let me finish off what I was saying here, sorry, yeah? So the Islamic thesis, in its essence, is a different thesis. The liberal thesis it prioritizes the human being over and above everything else, right? The Islamic thesis prioritizes Allah over and above everything else. It's completely different. The difference, there's one main difference is this, is that Islam attempts to, do you know it's really interesting? Islam and the Quran has a method of falsification. Yeah, it does. It attempts to prove itself. Whereas liberalism, democracy, secularism does not even attempt that. It doesn't even attempt to do that.
Liberalism is not looking to be...
By the way, I'm not saying that liberalism as an ideology is all, practically speaking, is at odds with Islam. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that generally speaking, its epistemological roots are different. The presuppositions of liberalism and the presuppositions of Islam are different.
The question we should ask is liberalism as an ideology trying to say this is absolute truth, or just trying to put...
Yeah, I'm saying if it's not, then the thing is, we're saying that Islam, the case for Islam is that it's an absolute truth. Okay? Islam as a framework, as a religion, attempts to prove that it's absolutely, objectively true. Liberalism, secularism, and all these other ideologies, they don't even attempt to do that.
They're not intending to.
Yes, exactly. Right. So we both agree with that, right? So why measure something which is attempting to be an ultimate truth with something which is not even the philosophers that propounded it didn't even intend for it to be an absolute truth. Do you get what I'm saying? It's a misplacement. So here, going back to about what is the Islamic governance system? What is it actually? And some people have heard something, and I'm not refuting anyone here. I'm not refuting anyone. But a lot of people say Islam is democracy. It's democracy. It's not. Islam is not democracy. Democracy comes from a Greek construct, demos and kratia, meaning people power. And it was first experimented with in Athens, 3,000-4,000 years ago, whatever, yeah? Now, democracy, you have different types. In today's world, we have representative democracy. When we say democracy, we mean pluralism as well. Sometimes with the word democracy comes pluralism and liberalism. So sometimes the construct liberal democracy is used to describe this phenomena. Is Islam that? Is the Islamic system of governance that? No, it's not. It has its own system of governance whereby a leader is chosen by what you call Ahlul Halli wal Aqd. Ahlul Halli wal Aqdi are people who are literally, you could say, the highest of that particular community. So they could be higher. Why, for example, they could be academics. So you can have professors. By the way, do you know what's really interesting? Yeah? Do you know what? Let me tell you what's really interesting. You know, because obviously in the classical Greek period, you had different philosophers. One of them was Socrates, yeah? And he said the following about democracy. His criticism of democracy is as follows. He said, why would you allow a whole community of people to vote on a specialist matter? Like, for example, he saw politics as a specialist matter. Like, you'd have to be aware of economics, of military policy. You have to be aware of those things. Socrates' argument is it doesn't make sense to entrust a whole population with the ignorance among them and others with this choice, yes, of being able to choose the representative. He said that, or the policies. So it doesn't make any sense.
We ever choose?
Yeah. No. So do you see what I'm saying? So the truth is this. That's one issue. The second issue is as follows: do we actually have democracy? And are there trade-offs with democracy? Because now in the world that we live in, you have two or three aspects. You have one, representative democracy, which is chosen through an electoral system. In this country, it's called first past the post. And in most Western countries, it's actually first past the post. First past the post amplifies the electoral, the vote, basically, right? So it's not an exact democracy. You have proportional representation, an AV, which this country voted against, but then you have, for example, first past the post. Point is this: is one person's vote the same? Is my vote the same as your vote? For example, let's say I supported the Labour Party and you supported the Green Party, yeah? If you went to the ballot box and you went and chose the Green Party and I went and chose the Labour Party, my vote is much stronger than your vote. It's not one person, one vote. Why? Because of first past the post, the electoral system. So we have here the issue that Socrates mentioned, that everyone is not expert in democracy. Number two, the issues with democracy. Yeah, the way that first past the post works in any electoral, it's an electoral system. It's called first past the post. It amplifies the votes of the higher parties.
So that means you're not voting?
Yeah, so it means, say for example, you get, and this is arbitrary, I'm not giving you actual numbers. say 10% of the population or 15% of the population voted for the Conservative Party, and say 15% of the population or 10% voted for the Labour Party, yeah, and then 5% of the population voted for the or 3% voted for the Green Party, the Labour Party, who's got 15% of the votes of the population, would get maybe 40% of the seats. So it wouldn't get 15%, it would get 40% of the seats in Parliament. Which means that 15% of the votes amounts to, let's say, 40% of the... See, and again, this is arbitrary, but that's the way it works. Now, if that's the way it works, how comes this country voted against AV? AV, which is what the Liberal Democrats wanted, is when you have lower votes. So it's more proportionate. So my vote is worth more, like, proportionately more to your vote. Do you understand what... Maybe it's a bit complicated. Okay, sorry. First past the post... All right. First past the post is an electoral system, which means that bigger parties have a higher chance of being elected. Bigger parties like the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. Or in America, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. Yeah?
Who controls all those parties together? Do you know what I mean? Who's more in power than all those parties?
No one is.
Is there a party more powerful?
No. So whoever wins becomes the government. Yeah. Anyways, the point is, it's not a full democracy, right? So the one vote, one person thing is not what happens. By capitalistic necessity, one person's actions in society is not going to be the same as another person's actions. If you have more money than me, you're going to have more power than me. Okay. So pluralism is not actualized. Democracy is not actualized. Democracy, even if it was actualized, it wouldn't be. You couldn't argue that it's an objectively perfect place, because we know that. Democracy is mob rule. You have problems of, and people of democracy, they even mention this. They call it the problems of tyranny of the majority, where you have literally mob rule. Say, for example, you got 70% of people that vote on something, 30% of people that vote on another thing. The 30% is disregarded. The 70% is actually actualized. So it's not to do with what everyone wants. It's not, everyone is not equal.
That's fair if you think about it, because the 30% is less than the 70%.
Yeah, I understand this, but at the end of the day, if our premise is egalitarian or equality, then what should happen is that every juncture there should be equality. So my political ambition should be actualized in an exactly equal way as your political ambition. Now, if you're saying that actually it's not going to be like that because we're going to choose the majority, then it's not equality. You can either have democracy or equality. You can't have both. You can either have capitalism or equality. You can't have both. Do you get it?
In most cases,
this is just a way. So basically, the point I'm making is this: the liberal system is not only critiqued by people, but it's actually not feasible. You can't have a completely liberal democratic society. That's why there are trade-offs at every juncture. That politicians and societies must make. So for someone to come and say, okay, let's make Islam democratic, or let's make Islam liberal, or let's make Islam whatever. Say, look, it's not even being actualized in your own space, in your own domain, let alone you coming and trying to impose it on us. It doesn't work. It's a useful system for people that don't have morals. Let me tell you one more time. Democracy and liberals is a useful system for people that don't have any objective moral basis. It's not useful if you know the truth. If you know the truth, it's not useful. Pardon?
Isn't morality subjective?
It's subjective for those who believe it's subjective, right? It's objective for those who believe it's objective. For us as Muslims, we have an objective outlook on Islam. We say it's true. So look, what I'm saying is, with democracy and liberalism and all these things, in the context of a Western world, in the Western world that we live in, and in Western Europe, whereby we don't know the truth, right? We need always to ask about what the truth is and have some kind. We need a mechanism to sort epistemic truths. So democracy becomes that mechanism, right? But if you know the truth, we don't need to vote on it. If we know, okay, look, do you see what I'm saying here? Or does that make no sense?
What system would you say that?
The Islamic system, we have, do you know what's really interesting about the Islamic system? You have Ahlul Halli wal Aqdi, which is basically the people who, as we said, Socrates, as he said that not everyone is proficient or professional enough to be able to vote. So Islam doesn't allow the non-proficient people to have an input.
Who decides?
So I'll tell you, Ahlul Halli wal Aqd are the people who are basically the elites. Elites not in necessarily the economic capitalistic way, it could be academic elites. It could be people who are most intelligent, the people who are most qualified to understand things.
Intelligence as well.
Yeah, so those who have who have come up the academic ladder, or so the scholars of society, basically. Yeah. Now, this would mean those individuals would decide, okay, who should be in charge. But hold on, there's another aspect of it. There's two aspects. There's two aspects. One aspect, and this is very powerful actually. I believe this mechanism is a much more powerful mechanism than what we have. Number one, the experts decide who should be put up. And by the way, this is done in democratic societies.
The expert.
Yes. Just like, for example, did we decide that Theresa May should be the leader of the Conservative Party? Did we decide that? Did we decide when he was that Ed Miliband should be the leader of the Labour Party? No one decided. Who decided? Labour Party decided. So why did they decide? Because it was expected that they would have more political understanding of who should be the leader of their own parties. You could argue that the leader of the party is as important as the leader of the country, because they're making a decision as who should be the leader of the party. Same thing, the Republicans will make a decision that Donald Trump should be the leader of the party. That made a massive distinction for us, yeah? So we would say, Ahlul Halli wal Aqdi would decide who should be the leader. Now,
Ahlul Aqdi decide themselves to be leaders. Can they make
no, they can't. That's a good point. That's a good question. They can't decide that they themselves will be the leader. They can't do that. They will decide on who's most qualified. Now, when that's done, the second process.
What is the criteria to meet for most qualified?
So here, the Khalifa has 9 things. Khalifa is historically there's been 9 things according to a Muwarridi, as far as I remember, that have to be met. Okay, but if we're talking about someone who's in charge of a country, that becomes much less. All right, so it's not the same conditions. The person who's in charge, let's say now Ahlul Halli wal Aqd come and forward and put this person forward. Now there has to be a bay'ah.
What is
A bay'ah is when the people of that society now pledge allegiance to the leader. And this is how that person gets a legitimacy and the mandate. Yeah. So this idea of a social construct, a social contract, which Hobbes was talking about when he wrote the book The Leviathan, which Hobbes, by the way, was like, some say, and I agree with this, that he was like the founding father of, in a sense, he was the first liberal thinker, in a sense. Because he discussed the idea of social contract, yeah? A social contract is the idea that the representative, you're literally giving your will, your political will, to a representative who will carry out that will, yeah? The idea of social contract is everywhere, right? But with monarchies, it's forced. You have your subjects and subordinates, and then you have the monarch. In Islam, it's not like that. So you have a system of bay'ah.
Doesn't Saudi Arabia have a monarch?
So look, with Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Morocco, these are all current contemporary examples. Which
I mean, Moroccan monarch is not exactly the same as Saudi.
Saudi
monarch is very oppressive compared to
yeah, I mean, he's got reduced powers, and yeah, but this is neither here nor there. We're talking about contemporary examples. I'm talking about the actual Islamic framework, yeah? The point is this, is now this person, or these individuals, give bay'ah. Now what's really interesting is this. You know, they're talking about, we just mentioned this today, didn't we? We said that women were only given the vote in what, 1918 was it? Was it 1918? That's what, literally 100 years ago, or 1917 or 1918. Literally 100 years ago, yeah? Bay'ah was given by men and women. This is, you know, we're saying it as if it doesn't mean much. You know, it actually means so much. You know, that was never done before. Bay'ah was given by men and women. You know, that's a very powerful thing. 1,400 years ago, bay'ah was given by men and women, whereas 100 years ago, they were debating in parliament whether women should be given the vote. Interesting. Anyways, after that's done, now that person has secured legitimacy, a political mandate, and becomes the leader of that particular country. So look, the point is this. What I'm trying to say to you is that the Islamic model is very sophisticated. I would argue it's very advanced and effective. And had it not been, it wouldn't have been able to take over so much part of the world or whatever. We don't assume that untethered individualism is the be all and end all. We don't believe that. That's not our belief. So that's not our presupposition. Do you know, the question is this. When you deal with someone, you have to deal with them as per the presuppositions of whatever they believe in is. If you deal with a feminist, you say, okay, you believe in equality, but how comes you're not being equal here? If you deal with a liberal, you say you believe in liberalism, but you're not being liberal here. But if you deal with a Muslim, you say you believe in submission to God, but how comes you're not being Muslim here?
But there is, people define, like within feminism, there are sects. in liberalism there is
Yeah.
sects. You're never going to find someone people agree, you know?
What I'm trying to say to you is that you're using liberal, stretchy liberal ideas to measure Islamic theological precepts. And I'm saying if you can't even prove those to be objective, then there's no use you measuring it with the Islamic thesis, because the Islamic thesis is in no need to be measured by a subjective morality of a white man who's had forced it for 400 years and continues to force it down our throats today. We don't need the white man to force us.
Okay, you know,
So what I would advise, we live in a world today, yeah, wallahi, let me tell you something. I just want to really hammer this point home. We live in a post-World War II new world today, right? Where because the Allies had won the war, they were able to build infrastructures and spread their ideologies in a way that was not possible before, okay? It was possible in the colonial period, but it wasn't possible in the interwar period. After 94, you could say 1994, the situation became even more intense because the Cold War ended and the only ideological military power, which was the Soviet Union, had collapsed. We live in that context, which means we live in a dangerous world where you think you live where there is a monopoly of ideas, but you actually have the amplification of the Western post-colonial narrative and the suppression of the rest of the ideas. In that world, it's hard to take yourself out, it's hard to pull yourself out of the white man's shoes. We will continually...
the same argument would be made about an ignorant believer.
Yeah.
Because I've
Yes.
seen some muftis
Yes.
say a woman shouldn't
Yes.
sleep next to a wall because
Yes.
the wall is masculine.
No, that's ridiculous. Maybe,
Do you see
yes,
what I mean?
yeah,
Automatically Mickey Mouse.
yes, yes. The same argument could be made with religion. Yes, if someone is not critical, whether they be living in a post-colonial environment or whether they be a religious believer, and they don't want to ask questions which strike at the heart of their own faith, okay, and at the heart of their own existence, then they will invariably be overtaken by the currents of the new world. And I believe that this is a serious situation which could overtake us in the form of this wave of globalization, right? Or this wave of American hegemony. I say that before asking, because the majority, I've been doing this now, a da'wah, for a while. I've noticed that the majority of questions that are put about Islam relate to someone putting themselves in this 21st century white man's bubble, anachronistically looking back at the Prophet's life and trying to superimpose their own value judgments on this, and also at the same time falsely assuming that everything they believe is true and everything we believe is false. You can't start with that premise. Just because we live in your country, it doesn't mean we're going to believe everything you're going to believe.
I
Do you
agree.
and I'm not saying you guys are,
I
but
agree.
that's the message I want to put to them.
Same argument can be made about a Muslim country that someone left Islam.
Of course,
Yeah?
of course.
you've got to
No doubt about it. Yes,
got to start
but
from
the point is this.
perspective.
Yeah. So I say this. If whoever it is believes in liberalism, then the heart of liberalism is critical inquiry. If you think about it, right? So we have to inquire critically. Is liberalism itself, is democracy itself, is secularism, are these things worthy of being used as pseudo ultimate truths that we now have to measure everything towards? Or are these things, as we've discussed and shown, practically, when actually operational, not able to actualize themselves in a full sense? And if that is the case, then to what extent are they effective? And if they're not effective completely, then we know that they're not perfect. And if we know they're not perfect, then how can we measure what claims to be perfection with that which we know for sure is imperfection? So next time we ask a
Are
question,
you saying in order for something to be true, it has to be effective?
sometimes, yes. I mean,
Okay,
it's,
the Quran says don't drink. There's Muslims who drink.
yes, no. What I mean is that the ruling of not drinking is effective to one's spiritual and physical. Do you get it? All right. So the point is this.
Do you ever get doubts? Like
No, Alhamdulillah.
did
Now,
you ever used to it?
maybe when I was younger, a little critically and stuff, you always doubt. But when there came a time where literally I believe that Allah gave me a very strong sense of yaqeen, very strong
How do you
sense,
keep yourself not?
which means certainty.
How do you keep like? I don't even know how to word that. Yeah.
How do I ground myself? Yeah,
How do you know that what you're thinking is true or not? Like,
because it makes sense to every.
you know what I mean? Like that you've been
Yeah,
attacking.
well,
in the way that to truly take on another perspective, to challenge it.
yeah, I get that. Do you know, because Islam has a way of proving itself, right? It has a falsification test. It has an inimitability test. It has evidences that aim to prove its reality. Its core message, which is the message of Tawheed, of believing in one God and worshipping one God, is a message which I believe not only appeals to my logical state of being, but also appeals to my existential spiritualism. And I believe that from all of those perspectives, Islam is no doubt the most effective, the most plausible, and the most rational recourse for me. Do you get what I'm saying? So I've come to that conclusion.